Alright, yeah, magnificent bastards. What's blue and gold and crusading its way through the galaxy like it's got a personal vendetta against anything fun? That's right, lads. It's the Ultramarines. And today we're asking the real question. Could these blue-armored roaming architects survive the absolute madness of the Star Wars galaxy? Could they conquer? Could they hold it together? Or do they get absolutely folded by a Jedi with a suspiciously blue glow stick? Who knows, but we're about to find out. First off though, what is an Ultramarine? And what in the Emperor's name is a Guilliman? Is it a mysterious woodland man in tactical camo armor? Or is he the galaxy's most dangerous effective spreadsheet enjoyer? So sit back, relax, grab a dram, and let's dive in. You see, lads, billions of years ago, or at least what feels like billions of years ago, because Warhammer timelines are written by drunk historians fighting over a calendar. The God Emperor of mankind declared he wanted to unite humanity and conquer the galaxy. Now, most people would build an army, maybe a bigger navy, maybe invest in some diplomacy. Not the Big E, no. This golden lunatic looked at the entire Milky Way and decided the solution was to genetically engineer 20 demigod suns capable of bench-pressing tanks, conquer planets, and genuinely give historians migraines. For the next 10,000 years, these suns would become the primarchs, the greatest warriors, generals, and leaders humanity had ever produced. Unfortunately, Chaos took one look at this plan and said, absolutely fucking not. So the infant primarchs were hurled across the galaxy like the most expensive game of cosmic dodgeball ever conceived. One of those children was Roboute Guilliman. Now, some primarchs landed on bloody death worlds. Some landed on nightmare planets where survival was generally considered an optional extra. Some landed on places that would make modern-day Australia look relatively safe. Guilliman, however, got lucky. Instead of landing on a radioactive hellhole, he landed on Macragge, which was basically space Rome. Now, it still had its problems, mind you. Political corruption, rival factions, assassinations, all the usual nonsense you'd expect from a civilization trying very hard to imitate the Roman Empire. But compared to some of his brothers, Guilliman effectively had won the lottery. Now lads, the thing you have to understand about Guilliman is that the Emperor did not simply make a warrior. He made the galaxy's most dangerous administrator. If the other primarchs were weapons, Guilliman was an entire government disguised as a man. By the time he was a teenager, he had already reformed infrastructure, restructured economies, improved agriculture, restructured military forces, and genuinely making everyone else around them look extremely lazy. Most children ask for toys. My man Guilliman probably asked for a tax report. Most teenagers rebel against authority. Guilliman became said authority and created 3 committees to ensure that authority was operating efficiently. The man was less a human and more of a sentient spreadsheet wearing rather cool power armor. Eventually, the Emperor found him and immediately realized he had just hit the bloody lottery. Imagine spending decades trying to conquer the galaxy while your paperwork keeps multiplying faster than a Tyranid hive fleet. Then suddenly you discover a son who not only enjoys said administration, but is better at it than everyone else in your bloody empire. The Emperor basically looked at Guilliman, looked at his empire, and looked at his own empire, compared the two, and immediately started assigning homework. Of course, Guilliman agreed to join the Great Crusade, because conquering one empire wasn't enough. Why rule a few worlds when you can rule millions? And of course, other reasons. When Guilliman finally met the 13th Legion, the future Ultramarines, it was probably the smoothest Primarch reunition in Imperial history. Other Primarchs had dramatic entrances. Some fought their sons. Some tested them. Some terrified them. Guilliman essentially walked into the room, looked at them, saw they were already organized and disciplined, and of course, professional, and went, "Excellent lads! We can begin optimization immediately." The Legion probably looked at them and responded by producing color-coded reports and casualty projections. Within 5 minutes, everybody was probably discussing logistics, supply chains around the campfire, while other legions were off headbutting orcs and starting fights, and then setting people on fire. This is where the Ultramarines became truly terrifying. Not because they were the strongest legion, not because they were the most aggressive, not because they had the biggest guns. They became terrifying because, surprisingly, in a galaxy where repression is king, they learned. Every enemy they fought taught them something new. Every campaign gave them another lesson. Every defeat became a case study. Much like the ancient Romans who inspired them, the Ultramarines had a habit of looking at an enemy's tactics and saying, "You know what? That's pretty clever. We'll be taking that if you don't mind." If someone developed a better strategy, they copied it. If someone built a better military structure, they studied it. If someone invented a new way to wage war, they improved it. They weren't just fighting their enemies, they were harvesting every useful idea they came across. As the Great Crusade continued, the Ultramarines grew into one of the largest legions in existence at that point. Their gene seed was ridiculously stable, meaning they could recruit and expand far more reliably than most of their other legions. While most other legions did tend to struggle with mutations, flaws, and recruitment issues, the Ultramarines just kept growing. World after world joined the realm. Industrialization expanded, fleets multiplied, and trade increased. Entire systems prospered. And before long, Guilliman wasn't simply commanding a legion, he was effectively running a miniature empire called Ultramar. A realm that would eventually encompass hundreds of worlds and become one of the most prosperous regions in human space. And then came the Horus motherfucking heresy, because of course it did. You see, Horus understood something about the Ultramarines that most fans overlook. If the Ultramarines reached terror in strength, their traitors were in serious bloody trouble. The Ultramarines merely weren't another legion, they were a logistical nightmare for chaos. They possessed economy, manpower, vast resources, massive fleets, and perhaps, most importantly, Guilliman. So the traitors devised a solution. Distract the blue bastards. Enter the word bearers, a legion so fanatically devoted to chaos that they would make every religion to ever exist in history and modern day look like casual hobbyists. They launched the catastrophic betrayal at Cal and ignited a campaign that devastated Ultramar. Entire worlds burned, billions died. The realm Guilliman had spent centuries building was thrown into absolute and utter chaos. Even then, the Ultramarines refused to back down. They adapted, they survived, they reorganized. They even maintained a miniature Astronomicon, like network inside of Ultramar to keep communications functioning. While the wider Imperium descended into madness, Guilliman was effectively trying to keep civilization alive with sheer administrative spite. Eventually, though, the Horus heresy ended, though not before the Big E was entombed upon the Golden Throne, and humanity's future became significantly more depressing. Guilliman himself later fought Fulgrim and was nearly killed. Unfortunately, he did have to spend thousands of years in stasis upon a slightly smaller golden throne. Father like son, I guess. For most factions, that would have been the end. For the Ultramarines, the greatest Marines to ever exist, because Matt Ward says so, it was simply a Tuesday. Because by this point, Guilliman's systems had become, effectively, self-sufficient. Ultramar continued, the Ultramarines continued, successor chapters were created, the machine kept running because it had been designed to survive catastrophic collapse. Then came the modern age, 40K. Through a combination of Eldar intervention, advanced technology, and enough plot armor to make even the hardiest Warhammer fan cry, Guilliman somehow returned. Unfortunately for him, he immediately discovered that the Imperium had spent 10,000 years setting itself on fire. The galaxy was split in half, chaos was everywhere, bureaucracy had mutated into an eldritch horror, religious fanaticism had replaced reason, entire sectors were effectively collapsing. Imagine leaving your house for an afternoon and returning to discover your neighbors had converted the garden shed into a death cult. Multiply that by, I don't know, billions of worlds, and you have Guilliman's current situation. Yet somehow, he kept it together, alongside heroes such as Malnius Kogar, the Primarch Marines, and Maldo motherfucking Cato. Of course, Captain Titus, and countless Ultramarine successors, Guilliman continued holding the Imperium together through equal parts military genius, political skill, administrative brilliance, and what could only be described as supernatural patience for all the Imperium's bullshit. And that's the thing most people misunderstand about the Ultramarines. Their greatest weapon is nay a bolter, nay a battle barge, nay even Guilliman himself. Their greatest weapon is competence. They build functioning governments, they establish somewhat secure trade routes, they maintain effective supply chains, they learn from defeat, they adapt to changing circumstances, they create stable civilizations in a galaxy that is determined to commit suicide. So yeah, pretty bloody impressive. Right, it's time to do what the Imperium does best. Ignore common sense and start doing absolute unhinged math with galactic ending consequences. Now, for anyone who's even sniffed Warhammer 40K lore before, you know the golden rule of the Codex Astartes. 1,000 Space Marines per chapter. That's it. That's the magic number. Not because it makes perfect sense, not because it's efficient, but because Roboute Guilliman looked at the galaxy, looked at the Horus Heresy, and went, right, nobody's allowed to have too many lads with guns again, or we're all getting PTSD Part 2. This is the Codex Astartes, Guilliman's legendary book of please stop breaking reality, lads, I beg you, please stop. A glorious tome so detailed that every Space Marine chapter is legally obligated to follow it, and of course, may immediately start looking for loopholes like there's some tax attorney in power armor. And here's the fun part. Any chapter smart enough to break said Codex Astartes had to read said Codex Astartes so many times that they basically became an expert in Guilliman's autistic tier organizing spreadsheets just to bend said Codex Astartes. It's like trying to outsmart the guy who wrote the exam paper while he's still there. It's just, why would you do that to yourself? But anyway, let's start simple. If we take the standard Codex Astartes rules at face value, one chapter equals 1,000 Space Marines. Now, the Imperium, roughly, has about 1,000 total chapters. So if we do the rough galaxy-wide Marine count of, the most basic bitch math ever, say it with me, 1,000 chapters times 1,000 Marines equals about 1,000,000 Space Marines. That's right, lads, I did actually pass high school. That's your baseline. 1 million super soldier demigods in total. Sounds impressive until you remember Star Wars has enough ships to accidentally sneeze on a continent. Now let's zoom in on our favourite XL-wielding psychopaths, the Ultramarines and their successors. Officially confirmed, the Ultramarines have around 51 chapters. So, purely official lads in blue armor math is 51 times 1,000 Marines equals 51,000 Space Marines. Now that's the low-end estimate of the Ultramarine force, or as I like to call it, enough lads to ruin said planet's week, but not enough lads to argue with a proper galactic empire. Now here's the fun part. Depending on your interpretation of said lore, the Ultramarine gene line isn't just 51 chapters. Oh no, lads. That stable little Roman DNA has been cloned, copied, and split apart across the Imperium like a bureaucratic virus. It is widely suggested that the Ultramarine gene sheet makes up, roughly, 50 to 70% of all Space Marine chapters. So on the low ball end, which is about 50%, so 1,000, 50%, so that's roughly a calculation, blah blah. 500 chapters, so 500 times about 1,000, that's 500,000 Ultramarine descendants. Now on the higher end, again, same calculation, pulling it out of my fucking ass, 70% of 1,000, that's roughly, I don't know, 700, the math is on screen here somewhere because a smarter person than me has done this. No, they haven't. The math is on the screen somewhere. So 700 times 1,000 is 700,000 Ultramarine descendants. So depending on how generous the lore is feeling this day, the Ultramarines aren't just a chapter. They're not even just a family tree. They are basically an entire military ideology that just sort of refuses to die. So here's what we've got from my very shitty math skills. 51,000 official successor chapters only. 500,000 conservative gene line spread, or the maximum 700,000. And for this video, we're not going to be sensible, and we aren't going to be conservative. We're going to absolutely gloriously pop in 700,000 Ultramarine descendants because I bloody can. Because if we're throwing Roman flavored demigods into the Star Wars galaxy, we may as well do it properly. What about the fucking fleets though? Right lads, usually I don't do this thing in my videos because I don't really care how many rivets are holding a spaceship together. But after my Death Corpse of Krieg video, I got absolutely spammed in the comments with comments like,
actually, what about logistics?
and of course, the famous,
Actually, how do they eat in space?
so, fine. You want math and numbers about ships? You want logistics? Fuck you, here, have some logistics then. A standard Space Marine chapter isn't just a bunch of lads in armor. It's a full-blown traveling war civilization with its own fleet. On average, you're looking at something like 3 to 2 battle barges, 6 to 12 strike cruisers, and then a messy pile of escorts, frigates, and support vessels that pushes the whole thing to roughly 30 to 70 vessels per chapter, depending on how fancy they're feeling that millennia. These aren't civilian cruisers either. These are cathedral-sized war machines packed with enough drop pods, tanks, and armored vehicles, apothecaries, and enough bolter shells to legally be classified as a small moon of ammunition. Each one is crewed by thousands of mortal serfs, tech priests, and servitors, just to keep the whole thing from exploding the moment someone sneezes near the reactor. So now let's run the numbers on our increasingly ridiculous Ultramarine empire. Using our earlier estimates, Because of course Guilliman's small elite force is actually a galaxy-wide spreadsheet nightmare. At the low end with the 51,000 Space Marine estimate, that's about 51 chapters, which roughly gives us for the 70 to 30 ships estimate about 1,500 ships to 3,500 ships. Depending on whether you're assuming each chapter is running a tight Codex fleet or is just ignoring Guilliman's rules entirely. Now we're going to scale things up, and now it's going to start getting a little out of hand. 500,000 Ultramarine Descendant Marines, which is about 500 chapters, and suddenly we're looking at roughly, I don't know, with that 30 to 70 ship estimate, about 15,000 to 35,000 ships. Meaning at that point, the Ultramarines don't really have a fleet, they have a slow-moving civilization that occasionally arrives in your star system and politely removes you from the map for administration reasons. So yeah, that's quite a few ships. And then we hit full-blown, why the hell am I even doing this? With the 700,000 Space Marine estimate, or 700 chapters. That translates to something with, again, our estimate beforehand, the 30 to 70 ships per chapter, which is going to give us a nice of 21,000 to 49,000 ships, meaning at that point, the Ultramarines don't really have a fleet, they just have a goddamn planet of go fuck yourself. So yeah, that's quite a few ships, lads. And of course we're going to be using the final estimate because I find it very funny. And we're also going to be chucking them at the Galactic Empire. Right, here's a quick crash course for anyone who has somehow missed it while living under a Death Star-sized rock. The Galactic Empire in Star Wars is basically what happens when a galaxy-wide democracy has a very bad week and accidentally installs a space wizard dictator with a permanent resting I will crush you for fun face, led by Emperor Palpatine. It replaces the Republic with a militarized first regime built on Star Destroyers, Stormtrooper legions, and an obsession with controlling every star system that disagrees with it. It's huge, it's industrial, and terrifying on paper. Planets are governed through fear, fleets enforce order through overwhelming firepower, and any resistance gets fragged by an orbital bombardment or quietly handled by special agents in black coats. At its peak, it is one of the most powerful empires in sci-fi, with enough ships, soldiers, and super weapons to dominate most conventional opponents. The problem is, it is also constantly held together by paranoia, internal politics, and a habit of building increasingly expensive ways to blow up planets just to prove a point. In other words, very big, very dangerous, extremely efficient, and also one really bad assassination away from the whole thing wobbling like a badly balanced speeder bike. And that, lads, is the Galactic Empire. So lads, picture it. The Galactic Empire, still licking its wounds from the Civil War chaos, stretching across a galaxy of industrial worlds, Star Destroyers, TIE Fighter swarms, and the ever-reliable tactic of building a bigger gun and hoping nobody notices the plot armor is collapsing. They've got a Death Star, sure, and in the best case opening exchange, that thing absolutely deletes a chunk of the Ultramarine fleet. Let's say around 10 to 15% of ships caught in the system-wide annihilation before anyone even finishes saying, "Target locked." The Imperial Navy follows up with the classic Star Wars doctrine: overwhelming capital supremacy broadsides, orbital bombardments, and eventually plasma and gun rounds to turn space into some abstract art. But here's the problem. The Ultramarines don't fight like a conventional navy. They fight like a controlled extinction event. Because while the Imperial fleet is forming battle lines, Guilliman has already done the math, rejigged supply routes, and assigned 3 companies to board every major Star Destroyer in the sector before the Admiral can even finish his motivational speech. Strike cruisers slip into real space like knives through cloth. Battle barges arrive like floating cathedrals of war, and suddenly every impenetrable Imperial capital ship has a very personal problem. Genetically engineered super soldiers inside of it. The Death Star might score its big opening kill, maybe it even does too, if we're being generous, but after that it becomes a target painted so bright even an orc could hit it. Once Imperial superweapons start getting involved, the second Death Star, the Eclipse class Star Destroyers, and all the other, we swear this will fix the rebellion this time. The battlefield shifts into pure escalation warfare. And that's where things get ugly for everyone involved, because the Ultramarines love escalation. It means more data, more patterns, more things to optimize into extinction. Fleet engagements start turning into boarding actions. Boarding actions start turning into planetary sieges. And planetary sieges turn into Guilliman looking at conquered sectors and immediately processing about 47 pages of administrative reforms titled How Not to Get Your Entire Bloody Navy Stolen, again, Volume 1. The Empire can absolutely inflict damage. This is not a clean sweep, and in about 4 out of the 10 scenarios, they drag the war into a grinding stalemate of super weapons and exhaustion, fleet attrition, and sectors burning on both sides. But in the remaining scenarios, the Ultramarines just do what they always do. They adapt faster than the opponent can replace losses. And that's the real killer here. Because the Galactic Empire is built on scale, fear, and overwhelming firepower. But the Ultramarines operate on precision, adaptation, and the horrifying concept of we've already studied your entire military doctrine last week. Star Destroyers don't really matter when they're being strategically decimated from inside. Planetary defenses don't really matter when the enemy treats orbital supremacy as more of a suggestion rather than a requirement. Even superweapons stop being decisive when the enemy starts planning around them, like their bloody weather patterns. So eventually, what you're left with isn't a dramatic extinction event where one side vanishes in glory. It's worse. The Empire becomes probably a mid-tier, battered, semi-independent regional power, still fighting, still massive, and still dangerous, but no longer the apex predator of its galaxy. Some sectors swear loyalty to Palpatine's successors, others fracture into warlord states, and a few even start negotiating with Ultramarines, because frankly, the blue bastards at least show up on time and don't blow up their own command structure every other week. And Guilliman, well, Guilliman doesn't even call it conquest, he calls it a temporary acquisition. So yeah, the Galactic Empire doesn't lose exactly in one big cinematic explosion. It just slowly realizes across a series of very unfortunate fleet engagements that it is no longer the most organized violent force in existence. And that is very unfortunate for them. So there you have it, lads. The Ultramarines don't just survive the Galactic Empire. They absolutely run it a very expensive and very, very violent Roman-flavored administrative review. And look, I'm not saying it's a clean sweep every time. In fact, in my little mental war simulations, which I ran about 10 times, like a little sleep-deprived tech piece with too much caffeine, and a crippling sense of impending dread, this was the most interesting outcome that came out of that little mental jumping jacks gym. Because, yeah, about 6 times out of 10, the Ultramarines absolutely flatten the Empire with these kinds of numbers, lads. Because you gotta remember, there's no chaos, there's no other factions. There's literally just the Empire and the Ultramarines. If there had been other factions at play, yeah, it would have gone a little bit different, but it's literally just the Ultramarines versus the Empire. Yeah, even with the Death Star, it's not looking too good for them. I mean, it's not even a debate. Guilliman shows up, looks at the situation, assigns 3 companies to fix the problem, and suddenly half the Imperial Navy is having a very personal conversation with a boring torpedo. But those other 4 scenarios, that's where things get a little messy. Sometimes the Empire holds together just long enough to stay a serious regional power. And sometimes it just becomes a battered paranoid shadow of itself, clinging to Star Destroyers like their emotional support boats. But here's the thing, it's not just a pure steamroll, because the Empire does indeed have teeth. Super weapons, fleet numbers, planetary bombardment, all these things absolutely cause damage early on. It's just that the Ultramarines don't really fight war in the normal sense. They coordinate their forces like scalpels dipped into holy fury and logistic paperwork. So once Guilliman's machine gets moving, it's not really going to stop anytime soon. Now, if this had been the Clone Wars era instead, things might have gone a tad bit different, because the CIS basically is what happens when someone weaponizes industrial output and says, what if we made more droids than common sense? That would be a different kind of headache entirely, but in this specific Empire scenario, yeah, the blue lads are walking away with the win condition more often than not. But anyway, that was just my take on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below, and if you've enjoyed this particular brand of madness, smash that like button, like it's a heretic, in a McCragg censor office, and subscribe, or I'll have Guilliman personally audit your search history himself. And if you want even more chaos, join the Discord server where the Codex Astartes is technically followed, emotionally ignored, and spiritually violated on a daily basis. And of course, lads, remember, if you see a battle barge in orbit, it's probably already too late. Now have a killing day, you bloody legends, and I will see you in my next one.